Hello, I'm Susan Nash. Welcome to Energy Minerals Division, New Energy Economy 2025. If you are new to AAPG, the Energy Minerals Division is one of our 4 divisions, and it's really exciting that we have this dynamic group today. And I will just go ahead and go over quickly the schedule, and then I'll turn it over to our presenters. So our first presenter will be David Beckett. We'll have Mike Bingle-Davis, Lindsay Ross, Lyle Triton, Matt Clucas, and Edith Newton-Wilson. And I'd like to mention also that we have among our panelists, one in Canada, one in Australia, and I think the other 3, I'm not sure, are in the United States, but I could be wrong. So at any rate, really happy to have this panel discussion and dynamic discussion afterwards. So welcome. I'll turn the platform over to David. So David, are you muted? David,
just trying to find the right button and let's give sharing the screen a go. Okay. Okay, hopefully this will come up. Can you see the slides?
It's working on it. There we go.
It's working. Okay, that's good. Yes. Yeah, I'm not using my normal computer, but and it's telling me my internet connection is unstable, which is always a good start. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the energy transformation and what companies can do to address that, and some of the geostrategic concerns around critical minerals. The energy transformation is often depicted in binary terms, and there's an expectation out there that it's something that you can just flick a switch and go from one energy type to another, but obviously it isn't that simple. You're getting a lot of voices contributing to debate, and the loudest ones aren't necessarily the right ones. That's very helpful when you skip forward. Okay, sorry, the usual technology issues. Did that without me even touching it. Okay, so as I said, loudest voices aren't necessarily the right ones. If you look at fossil fuels in general, not all of them are heavily polluting. Think obviously of gas, and some hydrocarbons are going to be very hard to replace, regardless of what we do with them. When you look at some of the green and renewable alternatives that are currently available, if you look at them on a whole of project life basis and look at the resources they need to get them up and running, they're not actually really that environmentally sustainable either. So, you know, for us to transform successfully, you're going to have to take a very rational approach and a very balanced approach, and it's going to have to be gradational. Some of the drastic activities that people propose are likely not to solve the problem. And again, my slides are skipping forward without me wanting them to. So, very helpful. So expanded access to critical minerals and rare earths is going to be key to sustaining the transfer.
David, you muted yourself.
I hate to say this, I'm not actually touching anything when this is happening, so it's almost doing it all by itself. So, as I was saying, the hydrocarbon mining industry can play a positive and credible part, and I think the part it can play is by using the expertise, in-house expertise it has to expand and encompass the full energy value chain, and that includes critical minerals. So, how can a resources company evolve? There's a competitive advantage that resources companies have, and rather than by discarding that and heading off on tangents to things like solar and wind where they don't have a competitive advantage, if they build on the one they have using the workforce they've got, the professional technical workforce, and maybe adapt that to different areas of endeavor in resource extraction, that will enable them to contribute a lot more positively than trying to compete with major engineering companies. There's also potentially for investors to be encouraged to support a pricing premium for truly green energy, and that can help improve energy and strategic mineral security in what is becoming an increasingly insecure world. Following on from that, governments have a geostrategic interest in supporting the exploration and development of these resources. 10 years ago, the world was probably a much more stable place than it is today, and access to resources is going to become increasingly difficult in today's geostrategic environment. So there's the possibility that there's a security premium to be had in terms of critical minerals and energy minerals, and that some governments may be able to, or may be prepared to pay that premium or facilitate investment. Looking at the supply and demand of critical minerals, this is a very busy slide and a lot of things on it. I'll try and make it available later by some means, but the critical minerals demand is obviously driven by the energy transformation, and it's very likely to significantly outstrip current supply unless we do something about it. At the moment, most of the companies that are playing in this area are smaller companies. Critical minerals are very hard to be cost effective for the large companies, and much of the current world supply is overly concentrated in China. Looking at other parts of the world where we may be able to explore for critical minerals, taking Greenland as an example, the new government there is a lot less keen on mining than the old government, so there may be environmental concerns that we have to think about in the future. As I say, very busy graphs, but they show that effectively we're going to need a lot more critical minerals than we have at the moment if we're going to successfully navigate the energy transformation. And on current projections, most of those minerals are going to be found in China. Now, that in itself is a problem in that concentration in any one source is going to create a monopoly situation, and that's going to be a difficult thing to manage in the future. So in terms of supply and policy considerations, as I said, the critical minerals are essential to drive the energy transformation, and security supply is going to become paramount. Mentioned international relationships are not what they were 10 years ago, and they're showing no sign of improving. And that's only going to be exacerbated by increased demand for these resources. They're over-concentrated in restricted market locations, either in terms of where they're mined or where they're refined and stored. And there is the potential for aggressive acquisition and warehousing by some players. And that's something that needs to be considered in terms of security supply. So governments around the world obviously are looking to mitigate that and develop policies to address those shortfalls. To be effective, though, there's some good policies out there, but they're going to require greater participation from the larger industry players and from government and private sector investment funds. All the UK, Europe, Japan, Australia, they've all recognised these risks, and they're all developing policies and mitigation strategies of varying effectiveness admittedly. So in Australia, the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, typical government department with about 50 different things consolidate into one, has published a very good national roadmap that considers international and national resources and includes funding options. More needs to be done, though, to look at how investment can be channeled effectively into these resource areas. At the moment, largely smaller companies, and in a lot of cases, they struggle to attract the investment that they need to move forward. Okay, that's pretty much the things I wanted to cover. Quickly run through them. A lot of it's throwing out ideas out there for discussion as we go. So that's me done, Susan, thanks. And I'll stop sharing.
Thank you.
Sorry about the technology glitches.
Well, that was really great, and really appreciate your presentation. And our next presentation is going to be by Mike Bingle Davis. So welcome, and I'd like to invite you to share the platform.
Okay, let's make sure I can do this right. I'm going to start my PowerPoint. When I did this before, I'll see. Screen share. So now you see the talks, right?
Perfect.
Now you're not, are you seeing my presentation?
Yes.
Yes, in presenter view, Mike.
So I should switch sides. Ah, screw this. I'm just going to pull it over.
I think that's easiest.
So you see it there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead. My name is Mike Bingle Davis. I'm going to keep this quick. I know how fast 5 minutes can go. So what I'm doing is basically addressing what AAPG Energy Minerals Division, or at least how I see things playing out for us as an organization. And as kind of an outsider, this was the first time I really got into how AAPG and AAPG governance is set up. So I pulled this slide picture from a previous president's, I guess, letter. And in this, you see exactly how AAPG is set up. For the most part, I really don't know much about all of this. I do know, however, where EMD falls, and the Energy Minerals Division itself falls within the divisions. And so what I did was I just broke out the divisions on this slide, which on the far left, you can see that AAPG has the Division of Professional Affairs, which is up here at the top, and several subcommittees within that. You have your Energy Minerals Division, which I circled in black, and the Division of Environmental Geosciences, which are these four down here at the bottom, and the Petroleum Structure and Geomechanics Division, which is down here with just one sort of subdivision. Getting in closer, you're going to see the center of the slide, how Energy Minerals and how the Energy Minerals Division is broken out, and it's broken out into these subcommittees from bitumen and heavy oil all the way down to uranium. They're in no particular order. I just wanted you to get an idea kind of how those are playing out and how those are structured. I personally believe the most robust and important thing that we as an organization have is this structure. I think it's great. I love the way that it's set up. But most importantly, each one of these subdivisions with EMD also has the EMD counselors. And on the far right, you can see how region by region, each one of these are broken out. And so you kind of have, minus the eastern region of the United States, which I don't and did not see, you see a pretty diverse group of people, which I think comes into a play when you're talking about exactly what I think we can do as an organization for the future. And so I see this playing out as the EMD counselors engaged with the local affiliated societies and singling out specific groups or problems that are occurring within their specific area. Did I just lose? Okay. And so each one of these has a counselor that's assigned to it. Each counselor should be engaged with their local affiliated societies. So for instance, Rockies has has RMAG, has the Denver Geological Society, has Wyoming Geological Association, and so on. So if you further break that down, you've got your counselors. And what I'd like to see, and we kind of have a pilot project that I'll get to just after this, so I'm going to go real quick, is each one of these regions engaged with the affiliated society, and then in that affiliated society addressing and finding a problem, or a group of geologists that are evaluating and addressing a specific project. Now that project's going to be comprised of several different subdisciplines: programming, field geologists, laboratory geologists. I put field twice, and also another wild card some geoscientists that may or may not be fitting into that particular project scope. So for an example, I've been working quite closely with Randy Blood, Scott McCallum, and Ashley Dowds. Right now, they are currently involved in a study of the Upper Devonian Dunkirk Shale of New York State. You can read their mission there. So when you look, you can see how, you've got your title over here, basically their goal. You have a affiliated society or group here, Software Underground, and what they're doing, or what they're available on call basically, is to be able to address software problems or software needs of the actual working group that consists of these three geologists. We do have on a couple of labs that are willing to have samples submitted and analyzed. And I didn't put them down. I didn't ask if I should or not, so I didn't add it. So basically what these geologists are doing is taking a local problem. They're trying to find critical minerals, rare earth elements in fine-grained shales. They're going to produce a series of webisodes, and the first being an introduction that's coming next Wednesday. So they're going to introduce themselves, introduce the problems that they're going to evaluate. And then after their basically 30 minutes of Q&A and talking, it might go longer, then they're going to launch into their first episode. The idea being that the members would then provide the substantive elements that EMD is consisted of, region by region. And so while these guys are producing the webisodes, members of EMD and probably other people can actually jump in, watch, follow, and procedurally witness how they go about evaluating critical minerals on the East Coast. We are currently looking for sponsors, so that's a little different than what the traditional methodology is. Sponsors that would sponsor these particular projects in that particular region. Another project that we're currently, and this is a live link I'll put in the chat if you want to register for that and see how this goes. This is more of the pilot to see if it works. The second program that's in development is involving Tyler Wiseman and Ian McBride, and they're going all over the Rockies regions right now and sampling outcrops and taking gas analysis and doing Rocky Mountain helium exploration titled From the Bottom Up. And they're in the process of collecting and writing and doing all these field excursions. The key point being is that what kind of stimulated all of this is the production quality of Randy Blood and his ability to put together a good program. So not unlike a television show, you can follow these individuals as they do their studies, as they progress with the research, and step by step, week by week or month by month, you follow them from the very beginning, getting to meet them, watching what they're doing, interacting with them, making recommendations, and following it from cradle to grave. And what EMD can do is help increase free content for its members. So, members are actually seeing and witnessing these things, potentially get involved on some of the side projects along with these larger projects. They can make connections with people that are global. You can decide what kind of geologist you actually are. So no matter what you're doing, no matter where you are, this type of online interaction is available to you. At the same time, when you are working in these fields, you also can form relationships that might develop mentorships. And so it's important for every geologist, and a lot of them I know that are unemployed, not working, that regardless of what's happening, this is the time. There's things that are changing that you can take advantage of. You are needed. Your research is important, and you're the only one that's going to do it. So AAPG's Energy Minerals Division is very diverse. We're available. Reach out, talk about these projects. Let's see if we can't get some things set up, and we can work on getting production quality up so that you can report to the geological community as a whole each one of us that are involved with these projects have thousands of interconnections on the internet and through LinkedIn and other social media platforms. So take advantage of that. And basically that's all I really have to say about EMD and what I see as far as the future being. I think it's great. So anybody that's listening, anybody that's out there, anybody that's listening to the recording, reach out to one of the Energy Minerals divisions, either the subcommittees or me, and we'll get you in touch with who you want to talk to or what you're interested in, and we'll move forward from there.
Thank you. And I'm glad you had a chance to talk about the structure of EMD and also this association as a whole, because I'd like to congratulate Elvira Gomez, who's in our audience tonight, for being elected Vice President of Regions. So welcome and congratulations, Elvira. And I'd like to share the platform with Lindsay Ross.
Hi. Yeah, I'm mindful of the 4 to 5 minutes. We wanted it that way because we thought that we should be able to make a few points in that and then go to Q&A. The topic is 2025 new energy economy and what do we need to do to get there for 2050 carbon neutrality or earlier in some jurisdictions. But what does it need to look like in 2025? And I think that's probably where the Q&A will go. So I scripted this because I have a tendency to waffle. So I'll read this and as we go. So my contention is that the range of observable action on climate change response by governments and corporations reflects the perceived range of uncertainty in climate emergency, and therefore variously represents the different perceived imperatives for action now into the short term. The range of uncertainty is due to widespread misinformation in the media regarding anthropogenic-induced climate change versus cyclical, naturally occurring climate change in general. Politicization and polarization of the public is causing reaction and division, yet ultimately is producing a policy mess as the public grapple with disruption and reprioritizations and the ecological and economic legacies of future generations. So I try to capture that in these various animations where I've taken the concept of the Gartner hype cycle and the Kubler-Ross change curve, turned it into a plane. And this is basically a three-dimensional rendering of two-dimensional concepts. As I mentioned, the Kubler-Ross and the Gartner hype cycle. The grey spheres represent trajectories according to initial response to threat or opportunity, depending on how you see it, and the subsequent emotional responses on the blue plane. And then there's a bridge of experimentation at which emotional responses are dealt with in a logical discourse of the experimentation in the real world. With successful experimentation comes implementation along the orange curve to a plateau of productivity. With failure to achieve logical outcomes at the bridge of experimentation, one pathway is to a delusional state on the blue plane of oblivion or plateau of oblivion, which is probably viable for some amount of time, but ultimately not endurable, not viable. Other states have demonstrated where exists denial in terms of threat-based view or inflated expectations in terms of an opportunity-based view. Which trajectory an individual follows, or corporation for that matter, depends upon perception of an external threat or opportunity in the context of the disruption in the new energy economy. Now, this will come as a surprise to some, but not to others. But the point I'll make is that, and I'm sure I'm not alone, is that by 2025, the public must have a clear understanding of what exactly we do know and what we do not know about the relationship between CO2 and anthropogenic climate change. Only on that basis can we reliably and efficiently plan what responses are required and by what measure. I've maintained this view for a while, and I recently read Unsettled by Stephen Kerner, who was the chief scientist for Obama's energy department, and I found it a fascinating read that builds towards this sort of logic, and I'd recommend it. Unsettled. If you haven't read it, it's definitely worth a look. Okay, so my point then is what should be the corporate response, in particular the response of the oil and gas company? Well, in my view, it is the oil and gas company, in light of uncertainties and risk, that it should take a portfolio approach to the new energy economy and leverage their intrinsic competitive advantages in the geosciences and engineering. I've presented more detail on this at ACE 2020 with my colleague Dave Beckett, who's the first speaker in this panel, and in various webinars and articles and you can access them from my very modest web presence at cherryvale.com.au. Another point I have time for in this presentation, within this portfolio approach for the oil and gas company, is that there exists linear integration and disintegration pathways on the vertical and horizontal axes of this figure. But I think much more opportunity exists for growth in the non-linear space between the axes through a combination of vertical and horizontal integration of the corporation into new ventures, including critical minerals extraction, processing, power generation, manufacturing, and given the non-linear space in which the corporation will be operating, I think most likely some new products and services that we hitherto unknown. So it's a little bit different, but it's a conversation starter. So that's me. Thank you. Hey, Susan. There we go.
So that puts me next,
The
Susan.
gremlins are attacking me now. Sorry about that. Anyway, that was very quick. So our next speaker is Matt Clucas.
Is it?
You want to go, Lyle? You can go.
Oh no, sorry, Lyle, you're next. Sorry
I
about
thought I
that.
was next.
I was like,
All right. So when we put this together, Lindsay asked me to talk a little bit about the challenges that we need to overcome. And of course, that depends very much on where you are, where you live and stuff. But my slides will advance. There we go. I'll take Alberta as a proxy since I live here and I ran the numbers early this year. In 2018, most of our electricity was coming from coal and gas, and it still is today. But going forward, by 2040, 2050 kind of timeframe, we're looking at doing a lot of things to achieve our movement towards net zero. Moving to electric transportation is going to take more than 6 times what we have for current renewables, just with our current population within the province. Converting all of our residential, commercial, and industrial space heating to heat pumps instead of burning fossil fuels is going to take, sorry about that, about 7 times what we currently have in renewables, wind, solar, and hydro. And moving to non-fossil power production is going to be even harder. So, either it's going to be 10 or 12 times our current renewables in renewable supply, or it's going to be a lot of CCS to get us to low carbon power generation. So we need to have 20 times today's low carbon power generation within the next 20-ish years. That's a very big challenge. It's going to add cost, whether we're doing carbon capture and sequestration or geothermal or nuclear or battery storage or whatever. That's all going to be more expensive than what we do today. We love hydrocarbons for a reason. Of course, that doesn't account for growth in our economy, in our number of people. It doesn't account for the issues that we have with industrial heating. Some of that will go away because of our heavy fossil fuel industry. Some of that may disappear. And it doesn't account for our large fertilizer industry in the province where we'll need low carbon hydrogen. So there's a lot of challenges ahead of us. And that's just looking at Alberta. Every jurisdiction will be a little bit different. On the electricity side, we need a lot more low carbon electricity. Canada's got a great track record. We have a lot of hydroelectricity, some nuclear. Overall, it's a pretty green grid, but it's very regional in approach. There's not a lot of interties between them. So in Alberta, Saskatchewan, it's mostly coal and gas. In some of the other provinces, it's mostly hydro. We're going to need more hydro, more solar, more wind. We're going to need to do geothermal, and we're doing the first geothermal well in Alberta right now. I hope that goes well. We will probably need more conventional nuclear. I believe that we need that as a backstop to allow the other renewables to come in. On the right side of this chart are things that are not really yet proven as viable and applicable, right? Carbon capture and sequestration doesn't really work everywhere. It will work in some places. SMRs, they're all the rage in Canada right now, and I know there's a lot of talk in the US. Whether that's actually ever going to make any sense, there's a lot of doubters out there. Tidal power, wave power, these other emerging power technologies, A lot of challenges still to actually make them be commercially viable at a scale that matters. 1 megawatt here or there doesn't matter. We're talking about terawatts that are needed across the world. We're also going to need energy storage. With all these renewables, many of them being intermittent or unreliable, we need a lot of storage. So today we have pumped hydro storage, we have solar thermal storage, we have battery storage. All of those exist. All of those are in practice today. The global storage right now it totals about 500 gigawatt hours, and most of that is pumped hydro, and it's mostly in Asia. We're going to need to scale that up by orders of magnitude in order to accommodate intermittent renewable sources. So what's that going to look like? Flow batteries are one concept. I worked on a vanadium project 20 years ago when flow batteries were about to be the next big thing. And they're still about to be the next big thing. Hydrogen as a storage source, well, that's been ready to be the next big thing for 20 years as well, but it's not there. Gravity has been tested, is possible, but it's going to be, I think, pretty limited in location. Compressed air storage, actually very interesting from a geological standpoint, because maybe we can reuse some of the reservoirs. But again, it's only been tested at a very small scale to date. It's not really a viable commercial technology right now. 20 years out, we need to get more of these to be viable technologies. So when I look at the energy issues going out to 2040, in order to develop a plan for the next 5 years, I think about, we need decarbonization, and that's going to mean we need to do a lot more mining, whether it's metals for batteries, whether it's copper for wires, whether it's uranium. We need things that are going to help us generate and transform and carry energy around. We're going to need to invest really heavily in energy efficiency. All of the plans that I've seen to get us to a low carbon future only work if we have huge investments in energy efficiency to reduce the amount of energy that we need to use. We're going to have rising demands for a bunch of things, maybe for natural gas, for renewables for sure, for storage media. And with the way our society works today, we're going to have really significant environmental, social, and governance issues around these new resources. Everybody wants new resources, but they want them developed responsibly. We don't want to be going into countries and ripping things out and leaving a mess behind and corrupting the government and things like that. That's not the way we should be doing business, and savvy consumers recognize that. So for the next 5 years, my contention is that we need to demonstrate that the path is viable. We need to get large renewables deployment out there, much bigger than we have today. And with that, we need to prove the grid penetration. Is it 30%, 40%, 50, 60, 70% on intermittent renewables? I don't know the answer. Part of that will depend on storage deployment. We'll need large scale storage deployment. That could solve the grid penetration issue for intermittent sources, as can grid management. With smart grid management, you can do an awful lot around moving energy around and moving energy demand around in time of day. We're going to need interconnects, large interconnects between regions to be able to share energy across regions. So here in Canada, BC and Manitoba on either side of Alberta and Saskatchewan, which are the oil provinces, have huge hydro facilities, but there's very little east-west flow. So we need those interconnects so that we can actually develop a national system. And we need to prove or disprove some of the things that are out there today as potential solutions. Carbon capture and sequestration, I'm on the fence as to how sensible it is. It won't be the savior of the industry, I don't believe, because it can't capture everything. Small modular nuclear reactors, are they going to be feasible within a realistic time frame? I think the jury's out. Hydrogen as fuel, I do not believe in hydrogen as fuel, but I could be wrong. I believe in hydrogen as is a hugely important part of our future as a chemistry source, and we need green hydrogen for that. But what we need to do is to figure out what are the stupid things and quit working on them. We're going to waste a lot of energy if we try and chase every avenue through to its ultimate conclusion. So, that's the next 5 years. For tomorrow, I think the plan is that we all need to sit down and think about what that path to net zero looks like. The IEA released a report yesterday on net zero by 2050, and it looks a lot different than what's out there today in their sustainable development scenarios and stated policy scenarios. So this energy forecast I have on the right, put out by the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, forecasts oil rising for the next 20 years, gas rising, coal falling, other renewables rising. Is that actually the path that we're going to be on, or the path that we need to be on? This is the path from the net zero report that came out today. That doesn't look like rising demand for any fossil fuels. Maybe for a few years for gas, but then falling very rapidly. Whether that's doable or not, whether that's viable, practical, realistic, I can't answer those questions. We as a society have to. So I'll end it there and yield my time, as they say.
Great. Well, thank you. That was excellent. So really appreciate it. So our next presenter is Matt Clucas.
Thank you, Susan and Lyle. I almost see it fitting that you go first, given that you're sitting in Edmonton and I'm in Calgary, and the Oilers are playing a playoff game tonight, and the Flames will be golfing shortly hereafter. So thanks, Susan. Really, to understand the role of the oil and gas company in 2050 and what tangible actions we can be taken by 2025, we first really need to understand the role of hydrocarbons in the energy transition. Lyle, you touched on this already, and I want to look at it in three angles. One, looking at the energy mix, then geography and pace of disruption, and I'll pose some thoughts and questions around each. So first, let's look at the energy mix. And on the slide right now on the left, you can see 2019 versus 2040. A lot of this, I think, is general consensus. And again, I'm not here to debate where this goes. Like you, Lyle, I'm not sure which direction it goes, but I think overall, we see oil and coal plateauing, decreasing, and it really the gap being picked up by natural gas and these low carbon fuels. And already today, we're seeing oil and gas companies starting to adapt, and this is mainly led by European IOCs. They're looking at responsible oil production, natural gas development, a lot of heavy investment in LNG, kind of on the back end of you see the growth in natural gas. And finally, the balanced power solution. So, they're looking at windmills and solars and how they can adapt their mix. And I would challenge anyone to go on to Shell or BP and their website and try and find a list of the oil fields they produce globally. It's very difficult to find now, but you can find exactly where the windmills and the reforestation projects are, which I do think is a good thing. And it shows that is adapting. But regardless of where or what the energy mix is, energy is needed to fuel the world's largest growing economies. And where is that? That's in Asia. One may look at this map and it shows energy balance of traded fuel, so your traditional oil, gas, and coal, blue being a surplus and red being a deficit. This is from a BP energy forecast. You might look at this and say, wow, Russia, Middle East, Africa, North America are either really good producers or really efficient in their uses. And both cases are relatively true, but we all know that population and economic growth underpin this data. Focusing in on Asia and being in Canada and the US, and we have some presenters in Australia, we've seen a lot of a big drive of Asian NOCs coming in and securing natural resources to fuel their economies. It's a form of energy security. So the first question I'll pose is how will NOCs, which were created to secure energy for their countries, adapt? And will they double down on this traditional fuels approach and continue to go more to this oil, gas, and coal, or we're going to see them transition to a national energy company where they drive a lot of, where they're participating in driving this energy transition. Now, this decision could really play a large part in how quickly renewables penetrate the market share. If these large economies and these large, we'll call them national energy companies, start and really participate in that transition. So how fast will renewables gain what I'm going to call market share in the global energy mix? you can see this graph, and I quite like it. The data is actually from Vaclav Smil, his book, Energy Civilization. And I actually took this slide from my colleague, Aaron Foyer, so I can't take credit for it. But what you see here on the y-axis is a percentage of global energy fuel supply. And on the X is years after reaching 5% of global energy supply. So as you can see, everything starts at 5% in 0 years. And what you see is, coal has been able to make it to 50% after 60 years, oil 40% after 60 years, and natural gas is only at 25% after 50 years. And what really shapes this curve? I think it comes down to a few things. One, competition amongst the energy sources as well. When coal came out, it was relatively on its own. Oil had to compete with coal. Natural gas now has to compete with both. Another big part of it is transportation and ease of transportation and cost of transportation. Oil and coal, quite easy to move around. Natural gas, of course, a lot more difficult and costly. The biggest question is, you can see renewables just came onto this curve in 2019 at 5%. How fast will that curve move? And what is needed or what factors will play a part in the direction and shape of that curve? I mentioned one, the Asian NOCs, how they participate in the energy transition will dictate this curve. Regulation, investment, demand, social pressure, how will this impact it? And that really fits into what an oil and gas company can do and what tangible actions they can take in the next 5 years to help be prepared for a range of outcomes in a very dynamic environment. So I've got here a list of 4 things. None of them, I hope, are much of a surprise. But if you look at an IOC or an NOC, to be successful, need to be diversified. You see a lot of that already going to natural gas. It's a no-brainer. Low-cost producers, no matter what industry you're in, really, are going to have a competitive advantage. Being collaborative with governments and regulators is key. And the last one, and again, we talk about what can a CEO today do tangibly for the next 5 years to set his company up for success. Through this forward thinking and defining a compelling future. So looking in the future, where do I want to be in 5 years? How can I adapt to these scenarios? And then working backwards. And I think, Dave, you had a really good point there about resource companies using their competitive advantage. And I think that really, really comes into play here when we're talking about defining that compelling future. First, being able to identify what your competitive advantages are, and how they can adapt to the very dynamic energy mix and the changing environment that most companies find themselves in. So with that, Susan, I'll hand it back to you. Look forward to talking to everyone in the Q&A session. And I believe we have Edith next to wrap things up.
Yes, that's great. And welcome, Edith. I'd like to invite you to share the platform.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. Can you hear me well enough?
Perfect.
Excellent. There's a Tulsa rainstorm going on outside my window, so you'll have to forgive me if the thunder gets a little bit loud. I have the distinct privilege and pleasure of having the final word, and I'm really excited about that. What a great group of panelists and diverse opinions we have heard from the gentleman ahead of me. But at this point, I want to take a little bit of a different tact. There are many data sets out there, many prognostications, many points of view. I prefer for the last few minutes we have together to sort of create a thought experiment, to look from 60,000 feet at the problem and sort of see the gross overall picture instead of the details. So let's look at the forest instead of the trees for a minute. And the way I see things unfolding, the fundamental change that is happening in the energy world right now at this moment is that we are moving from one energy storage mechanism to another. And they are very, very different energy storage mechanisms. The old one that we've been working on for 2 centuries now is where energy from the sun is stored through photosynthesis, maturation and generation in a hydrocarbon bond. And In that case, the resources, the hydrocarbon resources that we capture are finite on a human scale. And in order to release that energy from the energy storage device requires destruction of the device, right? Also, we put a lot of emphasis today, because of our concerns over climate change and global warming, into how much CO2 is emitted in order to store and use that energy. And for hydrocarbons, and we need to look at both the production case, how much carbon is expended to build the well bore, to drill the well, to lift the fluids, to pipe the fluids to their ultimate destination, to refine the crude, etc., and how much carbon is emitted on usage when we break that hydrocarbon bond and create CO2. In the case of hydrocarbons as an energy storage device, we're talking something on the order of hundreds of grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour of energy used, right? So it might be 350, it might be 600. As you can imagine, there are a zillion numbers out there, but it's an order of magnitude in the hundreds. On the other hand, the emerging workhorse of the renewable energy storage world is right now the lithium-ion battery, but in essence, either a primary or secondary, either a disposable or rechargeable battery. And in this case, we're doing exactly the same thing, storing energy generated by the sun, either via wind or through solar. We're storing energy generated ultimately by the sun in the conductive materials that release and capture electrons, right? So in this case, the energy that we're storing and releasing comes from infinite resources that are renewable in our lifetime. And I know we've all seen resource assessments of how much of this is available out there. The other fundamental difference in this energy storage device is that it is not blown up on usage, right? It is every element of a Tesla car battery, of a redox flow battery, can be repurposed, reused, and recycled. And this is why one of the biggest industries in Silicon Valley today in the startup community is looking at recycling these components, because that's where the true efficiency lies in this energy storage device. And if we look at both the use case and the production case of carbon emissions from lithium-ion batteries, we're looking at something on the order of 40 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour to make and use these energy storage devices. So again, it might be 10, it might be 55, but we're looking at an order of magnitude difference in total CO2 emissions to, everything soup to nuts to make and use these two very different energy devices. So what I want to invite you to think about is, what are the implications of going from one energy storage device to another? And I would say there are many beyond just CO2 emissions and beyond the recyclability of components. Instead of the energy business being about capturing and creating value and sort of storing wealth in a commodity that is very precious and held tightly, instead, we're looking at an energy economy that is built on service. It's built on efficiency. It's built on small margins and very high volume and reusability and recyclability. It's a completely different economy. And this takes me to my second and final point. If I can, there we go. If I can now sort of create a different thought experiment in your mind about how this transition or transformation, I love whoever used that phrase first, I kind of think of it more as a revolution, how this is going to unfold and what implications it's going to have for global business models and societies around the world. And I want to invite you to think about the pace of technology change, because really renewable energy is about a technology process, not a plumbing, manufacturing, construction process like oil and gas, but it's a very rapidly evolving process. I mean, if we think about how how cell phones unfolded in China, in sub-Saharan Africa, to the point where no landlines are now present. We're stuck with our landlines in the developing world. We're rapidly getting rid of them as fast as we can. But it's my contention that this is what will happen in the energy world, is that those under-electrified parts of the world where all of the growth is going to happen, as we saw from our last speaker, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, India, Latin America, where all of this growth is going to happen, that's where the technology is going to be developed and going to lead. So in this slide that I have in front of you, on the left, you see the old world, the world that most of us live in, right? Where this beautiful craftsman style home, in order to have the energy resources that it needs, requires a high capital, high risk, time-intensive, infrastructure-intensive process to get that energy there. A well to be drilled, a pipeline to be laid, a grid to be connected, a processing plant, a generating plant, a storage facility. All of this has to happen to light those bulbs in that beautiful craftsman home, right? This is our world that we live in the so-called developed world. What's happening as renewable resources and distributed energy resources bring energy capability and energy equity to the unelectrified and under-electrified parts of the world, is that the business model of these energy resources is such that one can go to a hardware store, buy a panel, a pair of crimpers, a small battery, and where electricity was not present, it can now exist. So this is a business model of low investment, rapid deployment, small scale repeatability. It's very easy, and it's lightning fast in how it can penetrate a society. And what we're left with is a different form of energy security. We're left with personal ownership and control of energy. And so in order to get there, of course, we have all of these incredible problems as geoscientists that we need to solve. Shorten supply chain lines, localize resources that are needed, all of the things our previous speakers have talked about. But I think, and I'm going to end on this note, I think that our pace of change is going to be remarkably fast. I think in the same way that we're sort of still struggling with Venmo, watching our kids pay all their bills with it, and everyone in Mozambique and Kenya and South Africa has been using M-Pesa for 3 years and will never build another brick and mortar bank. And that happened over the course of about 5 years. Smartphones came from the first one in 2007 to everyone having one in their pocket in 2017. I think this is going to be relatively instantaneous. And that's the real thought-provoking idea that I want to leave you with. This quote from Hubbard from actually the turn of the previous century, from the late 1800s, is very germane today. Watch out if you're complaining about it can't be done. There's someone doing it behind your back. So I'll leave it there and open this for discussion.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So would anyone like to facilitate or the discussion? I guess I can. So I don't see any questions in the chat. I do see a few really useful. Oh, here's a question. Does the estimate of carbon emissions for batteries include recycling? If not, do you know what that might look like?
And the answer is, are you talking about my estimate? No, it does not include recycling. And I don't know what that might look like. I haven't done the calculations. But one of the things that I find really interesting is some of the Wall Street investors that I spoke with early on in the battery revolution, and when I say early on, I mean like 2 or 3 years ago. were concerned about this idea that there was going to be this huge rise in demand for lithium, and lithium prices were going to go up, and cobalt, et cetera, et cetera. And they were saying, yeah, you know, our projections show that may happen for a few years until all the batteries are built, but recycling is going to come in and just blunt that market. So I don't know the numbers, but that's the impact that those who are doing those kinds of calculations are thinking about.
It's quite interesting. Anybody want to unmute and comment also with?
It might not be that easy to recycle it all. There's some startups in Nevada and elsewhere. They're trying to get a piece of the business co-locating with the Gigafactory. There are massive technological changes. They're not going to be able to recycle everything. And the demand is growing for materials is astronomical. And they're changing chemistries and so on. I mean, it's a very complex subject, and it's evolved a lot just in the last 2 years.
Yeah, and to me, those, hi Jeremy, good to see you. To me, those are the fun problems to solve, right? We have a battery recycler, believe it or not, right here in Oklahoma, who handles most of the current US EV battery recycling. And the first thing they do is repurpose, right? They take all the car batteries, pull them apart, refurbish them, and send them out as second life car batteries. And then they take those and stick them into storage towers for solar and wind. And then they take those, and that's when you get to the, you know, how do I strip them even further to other elements? But yeah, those are some really interesting problems to solve, and it's going to take crystallographers, mineralogists, metallurgists, materials scientists, you know, anybody who loved their microscope and those single grain oil mounts. This is the world for you. Nanotechnology, there are some fun problems to solve.
Great point. So Clinton Tippett has a rather polemical question. Do you think that major petroleum companies should allow themselves to be strong-armed into investing in renewables, even if projects seem to be unprofitable and past efforts were abandoned?
I can take that one, Susan. And good question, Clinton. And really this, I think for many of the majors and having worked for European IOC, I did see this transition unfold in real time. It was, you know, ultimately at this stage, it continues to be about finding and driving the efficiencies in those processes and making them profitable, and how they can, as Dave said, leverage their skill sets to drive those. You know, there is a lot of pressure from the investment arms, and I think in many cases it's, you know, I look at a lot of debt financing and listening to many of the banks that have traditionally provided that, they very rarely touch financing for big oil developments anymore, and they're driving more towards natural gas, carbon capture, and of course renewables. So it does become, at one point, it does become a stage of making sure that you have the capital, how you secure the capital to do your projects to drive your shareholder returns.
Wonderful response. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so Alejandro de la Rosa says, where do you see blockchain contributing into accelerating to a low carbon future?
Can I take that one on, Susan?
Yeah.
So blockchain is a real and growing thing in the metals space today. It's started a couple of years ago, and it's getting traction because people are very concerned about ethical and responsible sourcing of their materials. And I think the real role for blockchain is going to be in tracking what we do, what's in the stuff you buy. And because customers want to know, and you want to know if, say, the nickel in your EV battery comes from exploited workers somewhere. So blockchain, I don't think it's going to accelerate the low carbon future, but I see it making the low carbon future a much more responsible future than it would be otherwise, because tracking that stuff is incredibly difficult, and blockchain is the only viable technology I've seen for actually making it real.
Oh, thank you.
Mike might address that as well, Mike Bingle Davis, because you've looked at blockchain as a money saving
Yeah, I mean, it's just put simply, and Lyle's right. I mean, as far as gaining traction, it's just a chain of custody issue, right? And so rather than finding out that there's a leak in your pipeline, you just sort of put in algorithms that dictate and monitor how much you should have at the beginning and make sure that matches at the end. And if it doesn't, then there's something going on. And, that's something that can be used in all industries, really, in oil and gas, especially, because if there's something that happens to be a gap, or if for some reason you're not operating at the highest efficiency, even if you're talking about solar, wind, any of that stuff, it's just chain of custody, making sure one thing equals the other where it should, and if it doesn't, finding out where something needs to be replaced. So good bookkeeping, near perfect bookkeeping.
That's a good point. Plus the provenance, like we were talking about, making sure that you know where that comes from. And I think this Project Canary is doing responsibly sourced gas. So they're using that in conjunction with the things that you're talking about. Mike, that was good.
I mean, I was going to say something. Sorry, Susan, I was going to say that. When we talk about chain of custody and we talk about sustainability, Dave touched on this at the beginning with geostrategic implications. The chain of custody for an awful lot of materials for the new energy economy are coming through China. And so, I'm interested in what people think about that at the moment with respect to processing and supply chain security.
Oh, yeah. Hani El-Shamhawi has written okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, David. Go ahead.
No, you're okay. Keep going.
Well, Hani has written a long comment and question. It's a little bit long to read, so I'll ask him to open his mic.
Yeah, I'll summarize. I think in general, when we think about energy transition or energy transformation, the more we think in terms of systems, because the energy system is just that, a system, not just a subsystems, the better, because it's a little bit like squeezing a balloon. You could perturb it in one place, but it will affect others. So, I really enjoyed the talks earlier about, for example, the minerals and the battery component of it. But you really have to think also how that links with everything else. Because, for instance, electrons, no matter what you do, really, just the nature of electrons, unlike molecular bonds, is that they're very dispersed. They don't, you cannot contain it. You pretty much have to put energy in to keep it in one place. And that's true of not just the batteries, but the wires, for instance, And so if you think about it that way, you say, okay, well, I'm going to have, more EVs, for example, electric vehicles. I'll just give you one example. So if you do that, you need more charge points. And if you need more charge points, you can't actually, with the current grid infrastructure, particularly if you're more reliant on renewables, be charging all cars all at the same time, because you collapse the grid, and also it will take too long. And so you have to figure out, how do I do fast charging? But if you do fast charging, you need high power supplies to each station. And in order to do that, how are you going to do that? You would have to either replace the existing grid infrastructure or provide local storage. And if you provide the local storage, that's just that much more, need for more and more batteries. In addition to that, there are just certain things that you can't solve with electricity, period. So energy transition doesn't equal electrification. It's a big part of it, but it's not equal to it. So there will be a role for other carriers, the most notable of which, of course, is hydrogen. I think we've talked about hydrogen earlier, and of course, hydrocarbons still. But hydrogen is emerging. I mean, this is not the first time for hydrogen. It's not the first rodeo, right? The 80s were meant to be, the hydrogen generation, and here we are again. But hydrogen arguably has a very interesting role to play, because it's a bridge carrier between hydrocarbons, and if you want to reduce the CO2 footprint, then you might go to hydrogen as a very useful energy carrier, not a storage but energy carrier, and especially in places where you just cannot, you need to transform to chemicals for other reasons other than just energy, because the thing about hydrocarbons, of course, is that they're also input to a large subset of other useful uses other than just energy generation, like for example plastics, right? Like for example all the chemicals that we use, which are quite substantial. And so you have to figure out a way to replace those, and electricity is not the preferred route to go that way. So I just want to bring that up. It kind of needs to be looked at in this very complex way. And because it's so complex, companies that are going through this transition, European companies, are really struggling still to figure out a pathway that is economically viable. Because if you replace then, how you generate money today by sort of holding on to a precious commodity and refining it to get high value added products, it's not clear if you go with electrons, for example, how you would do that. You'd have to offer something else to provide that value add. So for example, I think it was mentioned just now, the offerings may end up being significantly different than they are today. They could come in the form of managing the electricity needs of your home, of managing your home as a smart home, of managing even your digital content consumption as a part of that. And that's how the money is made, as opposed to just providing electricity that may be so low margin that it doesn't even sustain a business anymore. So all these things are very interesting to think about, again, from the larger context of how it all comes together, not just as a technological framework, but actually as a business construct.
Well, thank you. That's very thoughtful and lots of great insights. I want to take a moment to recognize Ursula Hummus and have her ask her to say a few words. She's president of EMD. And I didn't see you when you came in, otherwise I would have put you on the spot earlier.
No, it's okay. I didn't really sign up for it because I had another meeting before, but welcome everyone. And thank you so much for joining this amazing seminar that Susan put on again, and so many different opinions and just really thought-provoking talks. Thank you, Edith, Matt, and I didn't see the first ones. And today we had a meeting about the upcoming ACE meeting, just in case you're interested in coming to Denver, which will be in person, but partly in virtual also. And we have our sessions just the way they are. And we actually have some additional spots for panels and discussions and talks and posters. So email me if you're interested in contributing some more if you haven't already. And
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And just wanted to point out that you will be getting an email from me with a link to the recording. So everybody will have a chance to rewatch the presentation or listen to it. And I want to say also that I didn't do any of the organizing. This was done completely by EMD and the team, David Beckett, Mike Bingle Davis, Lindsay Ross, Lyle Tritton, Matt Clucas, and Edith Newton Wilson. That's great. So
I'd like to thank everybody. We're focusing a little bit on these issues in the energy economics and technology area, and hope to hear from we got several requests out to the auto industry, because that's happening now. And we're really looking now at what's happening in the short run. We know that's going like crazy, and also in the power industry. So there's a lot happening that's happening now. Hydrogen is a little bit further out there, And when you ask, a good question is what's happening in the next 25 years, say 2025, I think is part of what we're looking at in this discussion. And I think we're going to see something comparable to like radiative evolution, that is a concept we all know as geologists, where there's so many questions with no answers yet about what are going to be the profitable paths, and companies are spending a lot of time on that. They don't know what blend of hydrogen might be acceptable within what type of pipeline to what type of valves and other facilities, and end use devices. That's a big question, and it's going to take a lot of time to solve all those things. And that's just one tiny question among many. So I just think we're going to see so much change as companies explore their roles. We heard from BP today talk about cutting back their production of oil and gas by 40% in, I think, 2040 or something, right? Maybe 2030 or something. And so they're planning to really do something else. And a big hurdle is making money while you walk. So GM's got to make money with this new cars to be able to to keep on evolving itself. And ditto with every other of these oil companies, and every step they take, they have to make money so they can survive to evolve. And so that's going to be a huge pressure, taking gradual steps that are profitable enough. And it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch, that radiation of strategy.
Okay, so I have a question. This is a little bit off the wall, but okay, so how many of you are familiar with the explosions and craters in Siberia due to melting of the permafrost and the methane hydrates? So, I mean, what concerns me is that methane hydrates and methane is entering the atmosphere at such a rapid rate in the permafrost that it's contributing to greenhouse gases in a way that's eclipses what other sources of fugitive methane. Is there any way to capture the energy or capture the methane that's coming from the melting permafrost? I mean, it seems kind of impossible. I just wonder if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Well, I've got a very brief thought, which is that the diffuse sources are super difficult to capture. And that's the problem. And it's the reason why you can do carbon capture and sequestration at an oil refinery or a gas-fired power plant, but you can't do it on the tailpipe of your car. It's a diffuse source. And so solving the energy issues and the greenhouse gas issues has to deal with concentrated sources. And those diffuse ones, we have to try and get rid of them, things like coal bed methane. How you deal with melting permafrost? I got nothing there. I'm a chemical engineer, not a geologist.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Lyle just said, when I was at Shell, we looked at direct air capture, and I see, there's several companies looking at it now, some putting some substantial investment. The problem is just, it's the laws of thermodynamics. There's not much you can do about that. Capturing something from a very diffuse source, like from the air, it's inherently a much less efficient and costly process versus capturing it from a chimney, from the output of a refinery. There's nothing you can do about that because it's just the nature of, if you want to capture salt from a salt lake, it's going to be inherently more efficient than capturing it from the ocean. That's just the way it is. And so I'm not sure that direct air capture should be, at least for now, the obvious route, for CCS.
Well, that's methane you're talking about. You're talking about methane, not CO2. DAC aims at CO2. So we don't really have a solution for capture of methane out of the atmosphere.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Methane is.
Yeah, I can't think of anything except, the things I think of, obviously it is, you're right, diffuse. It's pretty much like Four Corners area where they have a lot of leakage from coal bed methane. Oh. But there, at least you know where the source is, and the source tends to be more concentrated rather than melting permafrost, which is like everything. It's just very, very puzzling. I mean, it's like really challenging.
The only thing I could think of is a soil vapor extraction system. And that wouldn't be, you'd have a question and the engineers would have to figure out how extensive the grid would have to be in order to do that. You could also potentially determine where and why these concentrations are at certain locations and mitigate it somewhat that way. But when you're talking about an entire biome basically collapsing,
Yeah.
good luck.
Mm-hmm. But could
It's
any of our chemists think of ways, reactions that take up methane?
Yeah,
Well, I was thinking about like microbial action would be.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thought process that triggered just now. Yeah.
Yeah, because you could be as you like with that, Lyle. I'm thinking of your tailings spread out all over capturing carbon. If there were a mineralogical reaction, sorry, it's late at night, that we could engender that would take up diffuse methane, that would help.
Yeah, I mean, it would be microbes, right? Because microbes that would feed on the methane, which what happens in that.
I guess that's a biological solution. I'm wondering if there's also a chemical solution as well.
Burning it. I'm kidding.
Yeah, well, the easiest way would be to burn it. You convert it to CO2, which is less damaging, and then you take the CO2 and do something else with it. That could be another way.
I'm not advocating that. It's just,
No, actually, it would work because the methane is far more, from a volume to volume or even mass to mass perspective, is far more damaging, presumably, right? To the.
That sounds a little like light Russia on fire, though. So
maybe that's. And then there must be something then to do with, there's a lot of methane, at least presumably in the methane hydrates, below the ocean floors, right? So maybe that too can, a bunch of that will get released, let's say, with some amount of warming. Again, presumably, so I'm not sure what to do about that. Again, apart from some kind of biological solution, perhaps, or maybe the biological solution will happen, naturally anyway.
Yeah, the nice thing about the deep ocean hydrates is water is at its densest at about 4 degrees centigrade. So to change the temperature of the deep ocean and destabilize hydrates, like that's not a future that we're going to be alive in. So not fussed about that one. Whereas land is much easier to warm up.
Yeah.
Yeah, the methane hydrate is usually like just drilling hazards, as you all know.
Yeah.
Honey.
But isn't one of the concerns, I mean, I'm not a big follower of that, but one of the concerns actually is that the oceans are warming up in some ways, apparently. That's at least part of the rationale for, why fish colonies are decreasing and algae is disappearing and all that stuff.
Yeah, but it's more of a surface phenomenon. There's not a lot of fish down a kilometer in the ocean.
Yeah.
Right. You can warm the surface layer and it won't touch the deep oceans because the cold water stays down.
There's octopus, actually. We've filmed some octopus using ROV devices at about 4 kilometers. So there is.
Were they
they're
really
blind.
strange looking? Yeah, what were they strange looking?
Yeah, they're blind. Obviously, they don't need the eyes.
And now we're headed into deep ocean mining of nodules potentially within a few years. So we'll see what impact that has. That's
true. I wanted to ask about that actually. What did this group think about that? Because that's something that is contentious a little bit, but it's potentially a good source for minerals, rare earth minerals.
So being a metals guy and coming out of the, both the processing and the environmental and sustainability end of things, I think it's going to be very hard to get social license for. And I think that it's highly dangerous in that we can't easily monitor the impacts like you can on land. The impacts might be much less than on land, though. Deep ocean is not a very hospitable environment. It's a very low energy environment, so there doesn't tend to be a lot there. And it might in fact be a very low impact thing, but you will never convince some people of that. And so the social license will be extremely difficult to get and maintain, even if it is ostensibly from a scientific point of view, the right thing to do.
10 or 12 years ago, there was deep sea mining of manganese and other strategic metal nodules around Papua New Guinea. And because of the crash in the metals market in 2012, that project in particular stopped, but now they're picking it up again. And in fact, there's a new company in the UK that's looking off the northern coast of Cornwall for ocean metallic resources. So I think it's just a matter of time, not when. But of course, there are huge social, environmental hurdles to prove that they can do it responsibly and not ruin the environment.
Yeah, and there's two different scenarios. The one is national waters, like Papua New Guinea. Norway is looking at this, the UK. And the other is international waters, which is the deep ocean stuff in the Clarion-Clipperton zone in the Pacific, which people are looking at, but there's no regulatory framework yet. The ISA, International Seabed Authority, is looking at that and trying to develop the science and the regulatory framework, but they're not there yet, maybe in a few years.
What about Comet Mining?
Well, NASA has actually looked into that in a quite serious way. They have a publication on the economics of near Earth objects, and this was done in 2014, 2015. So it's a whole report on the prospectivity in that. And of course, you'll find highly motivated mega millionaires like Elon Musk and others who are quite interested in developing those models of resource occurrence, the asteroids and mining on other planets. So that's going to happen.
So I would also just offer to this conversation that while mining is certainly one issue for resource development, the real bottleneck right now is in the creation of advanced materials from raw mine product. There are certainly additional resources that we could exploit in terms of secondary production and underdeveloped, discovered accumulations. And the USGS has a tremendous database of all of that worldwide. But right now, the roadblock is getting that stuff from the concentrate to the refined product that's necessary for the bespoke materials for the various battery manufacturers. And right now, 80% of that is done in China.
Mm-hmm.
So,
It's a good point, Edith, and it might be useful to talk about that. I know that Lyle has mentioned it too, about the processing issue.
right. And that is, that's a problem that we could solve by throwing capital and R&D and development and startup funds at it. I mean, that is a solvable problem.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, a number of nickel, cobalt, copper, zinc facilities in North America today, and we could have more. We just have to want it and want to invest in it. One thing that I will say, though, Jeremy, you brought up earlier that, the oil companies need to remain profitable while they're doing these things. And there's been some questions as to, what's the role of the oil company? Is it in making the energy minerals or just doing CCS or whatever? I think one thing you have to wrap your head around is historically, the oil business has been substantially more profitable than the base metals business on any kind of metric. The base metals business is not an easy place to make money. And oil companies, if they want to get into this space, have to wrap their heads around that.
Well, and all the more reason for them to move into the processing side of things, because that's where all the value is added. There's an order of magnitude more value added in taking graphite concentrate to flake or spherules than there is in selling a ton of ore. So, so that's the piece where the business models might actually align.
That's a good point, because that's why I talk about the concept of the vertical and horizontal integrations and the power multiplier function that you can get between those axes. Because the rates of return, as you'd expect on as Lyle points out, base metal mining is not what the oil companies used to. But then again, neither is the rates of return that you'd expect on a wind project or a solar project.
I'm old enough to recall the petroleum companies all had a substantial mineral division. It all seemed to go away in the 80s and 90s, but it used to be that they had serious players. But having worked in recent years for a petroleum company that was trying to get into mineral exploration, the thought processes, the expectations are completely different. That a hard rock and a soft rock geologist have quite different skill sets, and they're not that easily transferable. It can be learned, but the way you explore, the technologies you use, as you say, the margins involved are just quite different. And so I think oil companies are probably going to circle back around to get mineral divisions and employ hard rock related geologists.
Yeah, I'd add in on that that's a good point, mate. Because I think of it this way: 40 years ago, the oil and gas companies, the mining companies, had a divorce, and now they want to get married again, or some of them, right? So the thing is, you've got geologists who are able to work in hard rock and oil and gas. I know quite a few. I'm one of them. And I started out in hard rock, gold, base metals, exploration, production, development, oil and gas, same deal. And I do see that there is a continuum of skills. And it's really the way that it's the exploration philosophy. So, for instance, you can apply play-based exploration methodology to minerals exploration by upgrading their versions of mineral systems analysis. And there's certainly different ways, but I think that we need some cross-skilling. This is something Dave and I have been working on. How do you get an oil company to become skilled in critical minerals exploration? And we think that there's some pretty interesting ways of doing it there. Dave, you want to say something about it?
Well, I was just going to say, we've done a fair bit of mapping, of skill set mapping across from oil and gas to critical minerals. And actually, when you actually map things out on a competency basis, there's a lot more overlap than you might expect. There's probably, I think, from the competency mapping work that Lindsay and I did, there's probably something like 60 to 70% skills overlap in between oil and gas and minerals. I just don't think, I mean, if you look at BHP, they're a major international company with oil and gas and minerals, but they're very, very siloed. There's no movement, there's no sort of movement of ideas or people across from the oil and gas to minerals disciplines. But if you were to seriously address that, it could work. And as Lindsay's sort of talked about, there's a lot of independent geologists out there that do work as oil and gas and minerals geologists and do it successfully. So why can't that go on in small to mid-sized companies as well? I think it's a failure of imagination rather than a failure of capability.
I think it's possible, but I think that 30% of difference in the industry only, makes all the difference between success and failure. I've worked in the environment. I've actually worked in BHP, where you have both petroleum and hard rock interests, and I think there was a failing of not having enough hard rock people there to understand, how to put money into the ground rather than into bureaucracies, and how to be effective at exploration and approach it differently than an oil project.
Well, that's the big company problem rather than a geologist problem, I think.
Yeah, and I'll add in here too. It's like, here we go. We're talking about competitive advantage as opposed to comparative advantage, right? But if we're in this plane of competitive advantage, what advantage does BHP, BP, or anyone have against Reliance Industries or GE when it comes to wind farms? Okay, if you've got a competitive advantage, leverage it. If you've got a strength, play to it. And I'm sure that you've got a lot more ability to leverage that from that 60, 70% skills compatibility to 90 or 100% than you have from a base on offshore wind for BP. Not that I'm saying they shouldn't do it, but that's the point, is approach this from a portfolio perspective because of the uncertainties in the future. We don't know where hydrogen's going to go, nuclear, SMRs, decentralization of energy systems, centralization of energy systems, exploitation of existing infrastructure. The oil companies are good at taking a measure of risk and reward and uncertainty. So apply that to the new energy economy in taking little bits of what you think are going to be the winners and participate and start getting your skill sets together now. Because who's going to win this is who's ever got the best product, the cheapest, but they can roll out the fastest. So 2025 is about getting cracking. And I don't think that it's worth waiting. You know, I think we've got to start moving now. So in 2025, we have a good understanding of what environmental regulations are holding us up on exploration, development, production, processing. How can we facilitate capital flows? How can we ensure supply chain? How can we start understanding industrial mineral marketing? These are the sort of things we have to have very clear in our minds, I think, for over the next couple of years. That's my two cents.
That's amazing. And you know what? Perfect, because we are out of time. And you know, I was going to ask you to say final words because you're the one who contacted me in the first place and really championed the idea of having this. And it would be so great to have do this more often. So I would like to just spend 30 seconds or so with letting people say a few words.
Oh, well, I'm happy to have participated. Thank you. I do these crazy 3D animations trying to explain things on a software called Blender with my son. So it's a great thing for us to work together on. So I appreciate it. And I think it's a great idea to go back into EMD and see if we can get more people to continue on with this series.
Absolutely. This should be the beginning. So thank you, everyone. And just want to express our AAPG's appreciation. Also, just congratulations again to Elvira Gomez for being our new Vice President of Regions. Also, I want to thank Ursula Hummus and for our President of EMD. And just final recognition to David Beckett, Mike Bingle Davis, Lindsay Ross, Lyle Tritton, Matt Clucas, and Edith Newton Wilson. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Well,
Thanks.
for coming. Great questions.
Thank you.